Everybody, it's Kimberly coming at you with a live today. Decided to go live for various reasons. The last few weeks have been difficult for me personally, right? In being vulnerable and being open and being authentic. It has been a very emotionally charged last couple of weeks. And then watching my clients also go through something. I always joke about the Ides of March. Being a very emotional time, something about spring. We see suicide rates increase during the springtime, so we know that there's a mental health residual effect from the winter. And then I think just people are in a very interesting place in their consciousness. Or maybe that is just God's way of reflecting back to me what I'm dealing with inside, right? So one of the things I really have been thinking about and mulling over for quite some time, a lot of it is reflected back in my professional work. A lot of it is personal, and I think with especially a lot of the sexual abuse allegations coming out, it makes me think about shame. And so shame has been very much top of mind for me. Shame and how it manifests and the price I have personally paid for feeling shame throughout my entire lifetime for things that weren't my fault and things that were my fault. Actions that I took deliberately and actions that I had no control over but assumed responsibility for. And I think that that is the interesting thing when I think of shame and where it's shown up in my life. One of the really big places it showed up was my lack of self-worth and not feeling that I was seen in a way that I really was, and having to really shrink and live small as my way to try to navigate and fit into the world, a world that I felt didn't understand me, because we hide our shame behind closed doors. We don't talk about our shame. We don't wear it like a badge of pride. When my daughter first went into mental health crisis, I didn't want to talk about it. Nobody knew what was happening behind closed doors. The mental health crisis at the time was symptomatic of years of mental health disturbance. My daughter didn't become bipolar overnight. She had had that diagnosis since the age of 7. We've been navigating that world by that time for many, many years. And today I've read about Jerry's son who is bipolar and unfortunately ended his life through suicide. And that is a very unfortunately common way that a lot of bipolar people exit our world. And of course it brings up all the feelings in me, but that is just one of the layers of the cake of shame. Shame of mental illness and the stigma, shame of being sexually assaulted and talking about it, shame of being poor and impoverished and struggling, shame of not being able to pay my rent, shame of not being able to be the person I wanted to be inside, but spent so much of my life trying to be other people. So much shame, so much shame. And there's a price that I have paid for that. Lost relationships, missed opportunities, peaceful night's sleep, right? All the nights that my shame has kept me awake at night because I wasn't thin enough, I wasn't pretty enough, I didn't have enough money, I wasn't a good parent, and the list goes on and on and on, right? And when I dig all of that stuff back and I look like layers of the onion, oh my God, I take it all the way back to my childhood, and I think about my attachment with my parents, and I think about the trauma that I lived through, and I think about all this stuff. Really, what it was is how I internalized my life. And I internalized it through shame because I didn't think I was worthy of love, period, end of sentence. Especially love for myself and compassion for myself. And today I was on a leadership call for work, and my boss was talking about self-compassion, and I just started to cry, right? Everything is just really resonating with me right now. I have been doing a ton of work around reconciliation, right? Because I think for people that are survivors of trauma, we tend to, and I always mess this word up, compartmentalize, you know what I'm talking about. We compartmentalize everything because it's survival, right? I am trying to survive the moment. I am trying to get through this. I can't let what just happened creep in, or else I'm just going to derail. And I did that a lot, especially throughout my divorce. Last week I went and I grabbed my divorce file for the first time since the divorce finalized. And it's a file. It's pretty chunky. Because at the time I couldn't read the paperwork. I couldn't really understand what was happening. I was going through the emotions. I was so worried about protecting myself and protecting my children. It was a very scary time, but I couldn't be scared. I had to be strong and I had to be stoic, and I had to get up in the morning and put 2 feet in front of the other and deal with my child's mental health, and then try to raise the other one. And oh my gosh, the list goes on of why I had to do what I did. I had to do it to survive. And that's great. But there needed to come a time where I could sit down and reconcile and integrate those pieces. Because what I did was live a long time feeling shameful that, we struggled so hard financially, or feeling shameful that, I had a daughter who was suicidal at the age of 5, or feeling shameful that I couldn't change. I felt like I had no control over my life. I was living a life that was being handed to me or done to me, instead of sitting back and saying, where is Kimberly in all this, and what decisions do I want to make? I had no idea that I could make decisions differently. I really thought that my story was being written by somebody else. And I remember one time a few years back, I was sitting there with a coworker, and she looked at me and she said, Kimberly, you need to write a book, right? You need to write a book about your life. She goes, but you can't yet, because you don't have your happy ending yet. And I mean, God, that must have been like 5 or 6 years ago. And I still hold on to that. I think about that often, that I kept waiting for this happy ending so I could write my own story. And that's a very passive way to live life, right? If we're taking responsibility for our actions and we're stepping into our own empowerment, then why was I giving somebody else the permission to write my story and wait for someone to give me my ending? I would have been waiting a really long time if I continued to do that. It was last week, I was sitting on my couch with a friend and we were talking, and he said, you get to write your story, you get to change your narrative. If you don't like what you're telling me in your life, and it's very negative, and it is, I've gone through a lot of shit, but I am empowered to change my narrative about it, to change my story, how I tell myself that my life happened, right? We are all just our beliefs. We choose our beliefs. We decide what we're going to believe. So if I want to decide to be a victim and believe I had this really hard life that I was so strong I overcame, that's great. But what else? How do I integrate all those pieces? Yes, I'm an incredibly strong person, but what else? Is that just it? That, I'm just going to continue to overcome adversity and that's my whole life? I don't get to have a happy ending? Or maybe just happy days, right? It doesn't have to be an ending. This is not a Disney movie, but a culmination of happiness throughout my days. It was incredibly powerful to hear. And I think there's a lot of us out there that are waiting for our happy ending, or we're waiting for somebody else to just finish writing our story or help us write our story, instead of stepping in and saying, give me that fucking pen. It's my pen. It's my book. It's my story. I was waiting to lose the weight. I was waiting to make decent income. I was waiting for my kids to stabilize. I was waiting to find true love. I was waiting for blah, 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 blah. And the most powerful thing that we do as people is make decisions. Once we make the decision starts a chain reaction. And What shame does is steals away our decision-making process. It lies. Shame lies to us. It's a heartbreaker. It is deceptive and alluring. And if you're somebody like me who had no self-esteem or self-worth, it was a very comfortable place to be, right? I was the master of my own creation. My life was going to be hard. And look, my life was hard. Wow, I manifested that. Shit. Of course. Because even if I would have had things set up in my life to make it a little bit easier, the narrative and the way that I framed my life would have never saw it that way, regardless if I would have been given those gifts. I was a self-fulfilling prophecy, just like so many of us are. So many of us let shame take the pen. Guilt about who we think we're supposed to be or how we're supposed to be perceived. I put a post today about, being weird. I love that. I joke around. I used to stand above my child's bed in the morning when I would wake her up and be like, I'm Batman. And it was just this huge joke. I'm a huge Batman fan. I love The Dark Knight. It's my favorite movie, actually. And, it was just like, Mom's so weird. Oh my gosh, you're talking like Batman. And, it was the humor. But I never felt like I could go outside of my house acting that way. And that's ridiculous. And of course, I've always been a little goofy and silly, and I use humor as a coping mechanism. Nothing new there. But what I failed to do was realize that was just part of who I am authentically, and I want to show up in life authentically. And that means goofiness, weirdness, and all. It's just who I am. And I felt very apologetic for who I was, and that I needed to live smaller than who I was. And it wasn't until Friday I had that epiphany. Oh, this is how I behave when I show up small. Oh, now I'm seeing it. When I let go of shame, I can show up in ways that feels good to my soul, right? That's important. So I just want to come out quickly and talk about this. I'm wondering, drop a comment. Let me know what you think about shame. What are your thoughts? What are your insights? How have you battled that? Let's have a conversation about it. I'm having a conversation about it here online, but I'm also doing it in person. So Being Unnormal is going to have another live event. So we're going to be at the Camas Public Library doing another live podcast taping. And Corey Anton is going to be my special guest. We're going to be talking about the effects of guilt and shame. The mental health effects of guilt and shame, right? How it all just runs the tape, right? So that's going to be, let me check the date here again just to verify. It's Wednesday, April 24th, so a little bit more than a month from now. Doors will open at 6 o'clock. Taping starts promptly at 6:30. We're going to have a live podcast session followed by audience Q&A. This is a really important topic for me right now, especially with things like Finding Neverland and R. Kelly and all of that stuff. There is a lot of people now dealing with the shame and the after effects of their sexual assaults because we're now talking about it a little bit more openly. And so my special invitation, of course, is anybody who has dealt with domestic violence, rape, molestation, sexual assault, any kind of psychiatric crisis, PTSD. Would really love to see you there at the live event. Hopefully we can say something, just that little nugget that can help you heal, that will resonate with you, that makes you walk away from that event going, oh, maybe there's hope and relief for me, right? Spreading hope. That's super important to me. So comment below if you like what I say. Make sure you hashtag replay. Let's start having these amazing conversations, honest conversations about the hard stuff. You know me, start making people feel uncomfortable, not trying to piss you off, just trying to get a little real around this, Our community, an amazing woman in our community who's such an activist for the mental health community lost her son. And no one wants to talk about suicide. That's icky, right? I mean, who wants, it's a depressing subject. But if we don't start changing the systems and the conversations around mental illness and mental health, nothing changes. So I invite you all to have those conversations. I'm always here. If you need me, you can always reach out to me at beinganormal@gmail.com. Of course, check out my podcast, www.beinganormal.com/podcast. All of our episodes are online and on major podcast players, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen, my voice will be there. I love everybody. Thank you for your ongoing support and diligence and collaboration and being an ally to those in the struggle. Love you all. Take care. Bye, everyone.